Okay. Welcome, everybody. I'm Samantha Bateman with Integria Consulting, and I'm thrilled to have Nabeela Elsayed here with me today. Nabeela, thank you so much for agreeing to come on and doing a LinkedIn Live with me.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh my God. So we've had a couple of conversations now, and I'm excited to dig in. Nabeela, for those of you who might not be familiar with her background, she started her career in at Starbucks as a barista and has moved up to CHRO, COO in organizations Starbucks, Walmart, coaching, et cetera, right? So award-winning COO and CHRO, and also a coach with Marshall Goldsmith. So Nabeela, do you want to kind of give us a background in terms of how you moved from barista to C-suite and what that transition looked like for you?
Yeah, I'd love to. It's my favorite story to tell, actually. So, I mean, I'm the quintessential retail success story, right? So there's so many retail CEOs that started pushing carts or on the cash lanes, right? And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the retail industry and retail sector is that it's so focused on internal promotion and promoting from the front lines. So yeah, I started my career as a barista, making $6.50 an hour. And this is the time when, Starbucks was opening 3 stores a day. The growth was booming. It was the late 1990s, early 2000s. And within a year, I was running a little store in Houston, Texas. I was probably 18. It was $1 million operation, 20 people. And then at the same time, I was going to school in the evenings. So I actually felt like this was like a beautiful process because I was studying business, I was studying supply chain management, I was studying marketing, and then I went into the store and the shop and I actually got to apply what I was learning in school. And so I got to put the theory into practice. And then I moved into district manager and new store opening specialist. I got to open up all the stores across the Midwest. So if you're ever in Evansville, Indiana, Batesville, Indiana, Kokomo, Indiana, I might have opened that store. I got all the sexy states. I like the Dakotas down to Kentucky.
Okay.
And then after doing that for some time, I was really focused on developing people, and I had this great track record of promoting people from my markets. And so my head of HR was like, "Do you want to do talent acquisition and leadership development?" And I was like, "Sure." So I moved into HR. But I started as an operator. And then I've kind of had that toggling between HR and ops my entire career. So almost 10 years at Starbucks, and I went to HR at IKEA. Then I went back into operations, running stores at IKEA, and then back into HR, and then CHRO at IKEA. And so I've just toggled back and forth. And I actually think that's one of the things that's been a superpower for me is I have this cross-functional expertise. I understand the operations. I understand the pressure of what it means to own a P&L and having to make those hard choices. And so as an HR practitioner, I can speak from that perspective of like really, really deeply understanding the business. So yes, I've just done that back and forth. And I was CHRO for IKEA US. And then I moved to IKEA Canada, back into ops, leading the Canadian business. And then I went to Sweden and then Walmart, and same thing. I started as CHRO for Walmart Canada and then COO back into ops. And so I like to think of myself as an operator that's just focused heavily on the people practice and how to, drive great business through people. And I've had the pleasure of being able to do both. So it's been really exciting.
It's fascinating to me because I think some of the best ops leaders had at some point touched human resources. And a lot of the work that we're doing on the ops side is replacing leaders who don't understand the HR piece. So no matter how well educated they are, no matter how competent they are on the engineering side or on the ops side, not having an understanding of how to mobilize your people, how to engage them and increase productivity by leveraging their skills, they're not going to be successful. But it seems like you've had a beautiful career of understanding both sides, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can be a successful leader without being able to lead and develop people. I mean, no matter what type of industry you're in, there's going to be a people dimension, a people component. And so, and even if you're, in the new era of AI, you're going to have to sell your product to somebody, right? To a person, right? It's like, and so I think you have to, inevitably make peace with knowing how to lead and develop people, or lead and grow people in any business that you're in, whether it's the customer facing or it's direct report. So I think that's just an essential criteria. I think it's less and less often now that you come across senior leaders who really don't have that care for and appreciation for taking care of people, but obviously it's still the case in some places.
Yeah, one would hope, but unfortunately, that's not the case. Not the case. So I'm curious as to what personal qualities have helped you climb the corporate ladder. Like, what do you think has been some of your superpowers in terms of how you're able to rise?
So there's several. I think there's the one that I know had a distinct impact in the speed at which I was able to ascend was I was very highly mobile. I would go wherever the work was. So I relocated a lot. I took opportunities wherever they were. And because of that, I was able to grow, I think faster than the average person might. So I think that played a part. And I think part of my mobility and flexibility in going where the work was I had a high risk tolerance, and I think that's the thing for a lot of young people is they're operating from a place of scarcity and sometimes a lot of fear and concern. And so having a higher risk tolerance, like if you pursue something or you move or you relocate and it doesn't work, like, it's okay. It's not, so I think early in your career is where you should, in my opinion, have a higher risk tolerance to test things and try things and, pursue new opportunities. And if you're going down a path and you don't feel like it's really working, pivot. But I think a lot of times we tell young people, like, you just need to stay on a certain path and get really good at that path. And now we're learning that range of experience is actually more beneficial for you than just a singular expertise in a singular place. So for me, I think just that mobility and high risk tolerance. I think the other thing for me was like, I took my own development very seriously. Like I still have a development plan from when I was the barista, and I have every subsequent development plan from that point on. I mean, for like the last 25 years. So I was very intentional about my own development. I was very planful about my own development. I took full responsibility for it. I didn't expect other people to develop me. I was just really intentional. And so, for example, I always wanted to get my master's, and I always had this, like I said earlier, like this process of working and learning and working and learning. It was just this like symbiotic relationship that never ended, even to this day. So it can be difficult to do, especially when you have to balance like all of that with family and other things. But I think just having that continuous learning mindset was really, really critical. And the last thing is I paid very close attention to the biggest problems that the organization was facing. And I tried to be the one that solved them or assembled people who could solve them. And so paying attention to like, what is leadership struggling with? What is the organization struggling with? What are those like really complex, difficult problems that the company's trying to figure out? And how do you solve them and do that at scale and then make it repeatable? And then you become this invaluable asset when you can do that. And so I always tried to do that over and over and over again.
I remember Cirque du Soleil at one point had a program where they would get high potential, hypo leaders to tackle some of the challenges that the organization was facing. And that program, my understanding is that it hasn't been in play for some time. But I do remember that there were some people that had kind of gone almost unnoticed until they were able to find solutions to some of the problems and from the most unlikely of places as well, right? So I wonder why this isn't or have you seen that this is a program that organizations are implementing where they are bringing hypos in to solve some problems and to challenge them to see, like, hey, what can you do here? What are your thoughts? Or do you think for the most part, organizations are kind of keeping that at a certain level?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are any program that's developed that is experiential, that gives people a real life case problem to solve and implement, I mean, that's always going to be the most effective. And I think that for me, it was just this, you know, I could see a problem and I could create a theory, and then I had this like place to practice. I think that's a lot of times where there's some fear or concern is like, do you have a place to practice? And a place to practice is usually a boss or a leader who's going to have your back if it messes up, right? And I was very privileged to always have leaders who are like, do it, go do it. I'll create the space, don't sink the boat, but go for it. So like, I think we talk about test and trial environments and not having the fear of failure, but that's still, I think, a difficult thing to bring to life in teams and large scale organizations and within yourselves. But if you can figure that part out, if you can, get over your own fear, have a relationship with your manager that creates that safety for you to take risks, and you start to try to pursue that type of a learning, it's always going to be, I think, maximum benefit for the organization and for yourself. So, I've been very great. Like I said, I've been very lucky to have that. And where I didn't have it, I either moved to teams where I could get it, or, I created it. It was an essential part of my development.
When you speak about relocation, I think about how in Canada specifically, it can be really challenging to get Canadian talent to move around, right? Mm-hmm. And I think in large part it's because of the cost of going to university here is means that people typically low cost, right? Lower barrier to entry. So it means that people are often staying with their families, or they're moving back home after they've completed their bachelor's degree. Whereas I've seen, in the United States, for example, where people are going across the country to university and then they're very mobile. So do you feel that culturally, because you've had the opportunity to work in both Canada and the US, have you seen that Canadian talent has been a little bit more resistant to taking up opportunities when it requires a relocation?
Yeah, so I actually think it's a North America thing. I think both in the US and Canada, it's difficult to get people to move because your home and the purchase you make in your home is like the biggest financial investment you make. And there's a lot tied to that. And then, there's so much of your financial security that's tied to your home and your job. Relocating, it feels like a bigger financial risk. Whereas in Europe, there's more flexibility, more, I think security in other places. And so people are more comfortable taking some of that financial risk of relocating, right? So I think it comes down to like financial risk that holds people back from relocating across the US and Canada, but it's not a Canada specific thing. It's actually the case in the US as well. When I was CHRO for IKEA US, we had a difficult time getting people to relocate. Same in Canada. But that's not the case in Europe. Like it was easier for me to get someone from Germany or France to come here than it was for me to get someone from Toronto to Edmonton or Edmonton to Toronto. It's just a different, I think, financial risk that people take. And so I can understand it. And that's why it can be difficult for people, I think, in the US, Canada, to make those type of relocation risks or take those relocation, steps.
But to your point, doing it when you're younger and before you have the mortgage, right? That's a great opportunity to seize those opportunities. Especially, we're facing a very tough economic climate right now. So I know, if we have anybody who's listening, it doesn't have to be that you're looking just in your backyard. You could be seizing opportunities globally, which is what you've done. So I love that.
Absolutely.
By the way, for any of our listeners today, and I would say, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll get around to them at about 1:45. And Nabeela, if you're open to it, we'll get you to answer some of the questions that people might have. Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about, a pivotal moment or a challenge that maybe shaped your leadership philosophy. Is there something that comes to mind in terms of, and maybe something that accelerated your path to the C-suite? Is there a moment that you're able to think about? Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a very distinct scenario. So It was, at the time, I was leading store operations in a single unit in the US for IKEA. And keep in mind, like a single unit in IKEA is like it's 300 people at about anywhere between like 125 million to 200 million dollars of annual revenue. So it's not a small operations, but it's running a store, right? An IKEA store. But IKEA was struggling with the e-commerce, the move to e-commerce. And there was this two schools of thought, like, oh, people are never going to buy furniture online. And then there was a school of thought where like, no, people will buy anything online. And when I was in that latter school of thought, like people will buy anything online, right? And so I took it upon myself. This goes back to identifying problems and trying to find solutions to try to convert my location into a more heavily e-commerce operation. So that meant, getting last mile distribution, which didn't exist, going after and building a last mile function, fleet, drivers, job descriptions, that whole thing. I mean, this was before, again, in the era where everyone was trying to figure out last mile distribution. I was, part of figuring that out, how to do digital marketing and, e-commerce and, that whole piece. And so what that meant in terms of operating model framework and, people operations and, how do you take friction out of the experience? And so I just started trying to solve these problems. And at the same time, I could hear the leadership, like when my CHRO would come to visit or my CEO would come to visit, or I was in roundtables or conversations, like I could hear that the organization was starting to realize that this was a movement they were going to have to make as well at scale. And so I was like, what skill could position me to really be of value to the organization? I decided to get my master's in organizational design and development. And so I pursued my master's while I was also trying to solve this problem locally. And I remember my CEO came to visit, and I was explaining to him what I was doing and the risk I was taking and the investments I was making and the theory behind it. And 2 weeks later, it was almost 2 weeks, he called me and he's like, can you come to Philadelphia and do what you're doing for the whole country? And I was like, okay. Sure. I mean, I had the HR experience, I had the ops experience, I was testing and trying different things in my little test, what was in my span of control. I had the organizational design and development and theory in my backpack. And so I went to Conshohocken, which is the head office of IKEA globally, IKEA US. And I started initially as the transformation head, transformation lead. And 6 months later, they asked me to take on both the transformation and be deputy chief human resource officer. And then that very quickly turned into from deputy chief human resource officer to human resource officer, chief human resource officer for the whole organization. And so I went from a single unit store manager to a transformation leader to a CHRO in the span of a year. It was a very big jump. It was, a big vote of confidence on the organization's part. And and that's how I transitioned to the C-suite, right? And from there, I continued to lead transformations globally, and then went back into CHRO and back into COO. So that was and so it was a very specific journey. And I think it was a very specific combination of skills that I just had at the right time that the organization needed those skills for me to add value at that level.
Nabeela, you're fearless though, right?
It is part of that. That's part of it.
You're like, yeah, let's do it. Let's go. It's interesting. And I had the opportunity to speak with Tara Wilson last month on our LinkedIn Live. And I see this trend of leaders who just say yes and almost figure it out afterwards. And I often will speak, and I have to say, oftentimes it's with women who will tell me, I don't think I'm ready for that. So if, let's say we have their next kind of external promotion, for example, it seems like there's a lot of doubt for women in terms of being able to, more than men. I do hear it more from women than from men. Okay. So what would not necessarily your advice, like, did you have a sounding board? Like, did you ever have any kind of like, oh my gosh, am I doing the right thing? Did you have somebody that like a mentor that you would talk to, or is it just kind of inner strength and confidence that you're like, I'll do it and we'll figure it out and it'll be fine?
There's definitely like I've been asked this question all the time, like have I ever faced imposter phenomenon? And I mean, we all have doubt. I've never, personally, I don't experience that a lot, or I can't think of like really pivotal moments where I felt like I don't belong here, or that I'm not qualified for this. Like I probably over index on trying to be as, the most qualified person in the room or the most equipped or the most prepared. And so that over preparation and over, constant learning and constant, like, how do I enhance my toolkit so that I can really bring the best value to it? I might over index on that. But, I definitely had people that I deeply care about who were also great advocates, sponsors, people who gave me reassurance and confidence, CEOs who were like, you can absolutely do this, CEOs who are like, you can do more than this, people who had more experience than I did and had more time in the organization, who were pulling me along and saw that confidence in me and belief in me, and that gave me confidence. It's like, yes, I didn't have necessarily a shortage in my own skills and capabilities, a shortage in belief in my own skills and capabilities, but when that gets amplified by others who are more tenured, more experienced, have a lot of equity in the organization, then you're like, okay, it just gives you an even greater sense of reassurance. And so, I think that having others believe in your ability and recognize that is extremely important, because often others can see things in us before we can see it in ourselves. But I've also gone through a lot of personal trial and tribulation, and I think that's been part of what's given me a sense of reassurance, is that if I can survive that, I can survive this. If I can get through that, I can get through this. And I think my confidence primarily comes from a belief that I can learn anything. And so it is that, I can learn anything. I don't know everything, and I don't purport to know everything. No one can know everything, but I can learn anything. And so I'm a fast learner, and I'm not afraid to take risks and fail. And so I think it's that learning mindset, and that really helps gives me confidence.
So how is that translated to how you lead and develop your people? What is it that you look for or have looked for when you're bringing people up with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I look for a lot of the same things that I just described, and I look for hunger to learn and grow, that they're driven in their own development. It's one thing to put wind under someone's wings, but their wings have to be out, right? I think that's the thing, is that, you have to have that personal motivation and drive for your own growth and development and to add value to an organization. And I look for this. Something that I've always had is just a bias for action. So I've always been the person that's like, do it and ask for forgiveness later. So take the problem, try to find a solution, implement it. If it works, teach others and bring others along. If it doesn't work, clean it up. And people who I think take action and take the bull by the horns and try to solve problems. And then I also really care for people who have a lot of compassion, empathy, and are just really humanistic. I don't want to hear the cookie cutter answer. I want to hear the raw, real version of things, because it builds trust. And I think it reciprocates trust when we can just be honest and human with each other, instead of just trying to tell each other what we think the other person wants to hear. So someone who's not afraid to take off the mask and be themselves is really important.
I love that. Talk to me about your experience as an executive coach with Marshall Goldsmith's group. What has been one of the most common blind spots that you've seen that you've helped leaders uncover? Is there kind of a common thread that you've been seeing in your coaching practice?
Yeah, there's definitely, there's three things I would say. One is leadership is really lonely. And we've actually seen research recently from Gallup and others that are talking about the loneliness that people are experiencing at work. This isn't specific just to leaders. This is in general. But the higher you go up in a leadership position, the more isolating it is. And so you really struggle to have that relationship with someone who you can just, take off all the masks and have that really open and honest, vulnerable conversation. So I'm seeing that a lot, just a lot of senior leaders who are really feeling isolated or lonely in their role. And then the other one is just people who are struggling with congruency. And I say congruency very intentionally because it's this thing about, is what I'm doing congruent with who I want to be? Is what I'm doing congruent with the impact I want to make? Is what I'm doing congruent with the legacy I want to leave behind? Is what I'm doing congruent with the life I want to live? And so there's this questioning around congruency and trying to reconcile their roles and the rest of their lives, because our roles at work, especially senior leaders, just takes up so much. It's such an all-consuming aspect. It can be such an all-consuming aspect of your life. And so lots of people trying to work through how to create that congruency or find that congruency. And then there's just people are exhausted. I'm just full-blown exhausted. Burnout and is pervasive. This is what I spend most of my time working with and talking about. The burnout pandemic is global. It's everybody at every level, but it is significantly affecting people in lots of different ways. And so people are just exhausted. And I think that's not, again, specific to executives, but those are the three things I hear a lot of.
Well, so, okay, on burnout, you're writing The Burnout Loop currently. When do you think you're going to finish that book?
Yeah, so it should be out in the fall of 2026.
Okay, amazing. Great. Congratulations, by the way, because I it's a lot to even just craft the time. I don't know where you found the time actually to write. That's a good question. How did you find the time to write?
Well, you know what? I'll tell you. So I actually had like 25,000 words. The average book is like 40,000 words. I had 25,000 words written. I've been writing about, I found writing quite some time ago, and I find writing to be very therapeutic. It's just a way to process my thoughts. It's a way to also settle my thoughts. So I'm an overthinker, that kind of rumination. It's just a way to get it out of my head and on a piece of paper. So I literally have like 25,000 words, and it's from like a decade's worth of writing. Just all kinds of stuff. And then I cobbled that stuff together in what was my first book proposal. And I went out, got an agent. I didn't know what I was doing. I went out, got an agent, and we shopped around, and I didn't get any offers. And I was just like, okay, they got some really good feedback, but didn't get offers. I really had to go back and distill my intellectual property, like my unique perspective, because there's a lot of books on burnout. This is not a new topic, right? But what is it that I want to leave out in the world, and what do I think about this topic, and how I, can help others think through it that's distinct and different. And so I went back to the drawing board, and I started from scratch. So I didn't use anything that I had previously. And then from there came my revised book proposal, which then we went back out and I got an offer for. So I think a lot of times, especially as senior leaders, as executives, as professionals, you don't realize how much you have. Like, you don't realize how much experience, how much thought leadership, how deep your perspective is in different arenas until you like excavate it. And I think writing is a great way of excavating it. So it's been a very, it's been a remarkable experience. It's hard to do. It's hard to write. You go like, am I a good writer? I'm not a good writer. Should I just hire a ghostwriter? I don't know what I'm doing, but I've not hired a ghostwriter. I'm actually writing this book myself, but it's been a remarkable learning. Again, I'm a huge, just really focused on learning, and it's just been a great learning.
So how do you see burnout differently from most leadership thinkers? Like, what makes your perspective different?
Yeah. So often the first thing is like people struggle to even create a distinction between if they're just tired or it's normal exhaustion, or if they're experiencing burnout. So just being able to know the difference between the two things. And then if you are experiencing burnout, we often try remedies like, I need to exercise, or I need to eat healthier, or I need to sleep more, these micro habits, lifestyle changes, things of that nature. And we might get some relief from those things, especially if those things are off kilter or off balance. But what happens is that, inevitably our old habits resurface and we find ourselves back in the loop. And because the system is set up to encourage burnout, like we are in a hustle culture and a grind culture that's always going to take as much as you're willing to give, right? So, and the difference is that what I've done and I coach people to do is I coach them to get to the root of the belief systems that lead them to volunteer and martyr themselves for their work. Because we convince ourselves that it's part of who we are, and it's rooted in our identity. So Arthur Brooks, who is very famous and has written many books, but also did a recent HBR deep dive on this, says that work addiction or workaholism is not the insidious issue here. The insidious issue is our beliefs around success and achievement. And so it's our belief systems around success and achievement and our identity and our value and our personal worth that surfaces in how we show up at work. And that's where I tackle burnout, is I tackle burnout in your definition of success, in these myths around success that we are convincing ourselves of, that we're telling ourselves are part of the success equation that we have to tackle. And so when you tackle these belief systems and you get to that, you can actually get off the burnout loop and stay off of it, versus just putting a Band-Aid on a gaping hole and finding yourselves back on it. So it really gets to identity and belief systems. And I mean, obviously habits and lifestyle is part of the solution, but it's really starting with belief systems and identity.
Do you find that people who suffer from burnout tend to be more micromanagers or don't empower or make their teams accountable, or is that two separate things?
I don't think a management style per se is, I don't think there's a specific management style that I've seen that makes someone more susceptible to burnout than not. I would say for knowledge workers or white collar workers who are working 60, 65 hours and it's self-inflicted, like, I've spoken to a lot of people, overachievers and high achievers, that like they are just obsessed with their work. They spend a lot of time working, and if they're not working, they're thinking about work. And so this is a self-inflicted like identity that needs to be unraveled, right? Like it's about, how do you define yourself? How do you define your worth? How do you define your identity? Who are you if you're not your profession, or who you are professionally? Who are you outside of work? And then how do you put that in balance for the rest of your life? So I don't think it's management style specific, not that I've seen or come across. I think, again, it is really rooted in values, belief systems, and identity.
Fascinating. Okay. I'm looking forward to your book coming out. So where is it going to be sold?
Well, it should be sold. It was purchased by a U.S. publisher, but it'll be sold across the U.S. and Canada. All of the normal book outlets should have it. Yeah.
Fantastic. Congratulations. I'm excited for you.
Thank you.
Okay. So I just want to, regarding your coaching, like how are you coaching executives through high stakes moments, right? Layoffs, transformation, public scrutiny. What's your coaching approach in those situations? Because I mean, you've seen all of this, right? Throughout your career. Yeah.
Yeah. So I use a 3C model for myself, but also with executives and leaders. And the first one is how to maintain your own equilibrium and regulate yourself so that you are calm. So that's like the first C is, right? Like we as leaders have to be good at regulating ourselves, our own fear, our own anxiety, our own emotions, because we can't lead and help others if we are frantic and anxiety ridden, right? So, is how do you find your calm through whatever transformation, transition, or uncertainty you're experiencing? And like I said, my approach is to go deeper than the surface activities that you're necessarily recommended to do, but like, how do you find your internal equilibrium? How do you find your calm? How do you, find that within yourself? And then it's really around clarity. And that's the second C is clarity is kindness. And clarity doesn't mean you know everything. Sometimes, and I've had to do this as a senior leader as well, where I say, I don't know. I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know the answer. And a lot of uncertain times where there's layoffs or there's reorganizations, you may not know because you're still in the process of figuring it out. Or I've said, I don't know. I do know, but I can't say. And that's the case as well. I think, and I found that people really appreciate that, because we're not in a position, I'm not in a position where I can say yet. Yes, I do know the answer. I know where this is going. I know what it means, but I'm not in a position where I can say yet. And once we are in a position to communicate, we will do so as quickly and as compassionately as we possibly can. So I think clarity is kindness. And I think often we avoid those difficult conversations, or we avoid because we think it's helpful, but uncertainty is really difficult for people. It creates a lot of anxiety. We've seen, for example, layoff anxiety. It's just the anxiety about a potential layoff can be as detrimental as anxiety induced when you're laid off. So it's really clarity, as much clarity as you could possibly provide through transparent, open, and honest communication. And then the last C is, how do you reassure people to, again, with transparency, and you don't want to mislead people in any way. You want to be honest and straightforward, but reassure people that where we're going is like things are going to be okay. So how do you create confidence, and especially in a transformation, the future is going to be better than the present, right? And that we're building something that is going to, position the organization for strength, so forth and so on. So how do you give people a sense of confidence and reassurance? So those are the 3 C's that I focus on in transformation. And then, those are the ones that I focus on with the senior leaders and executives. And I'm a huge believer of compassionate leadership, and compassionate leadership is doing the hard things in the most human way possible.
Okay. So when you talk about designing systems that serve people and performance, what's one system most companies get wrong?
I think what we get wrong is we underestimate the human nature of human beings. I actually just spoke about this in Riyadh. And I use the example of going after engagement. Engagement has been the gold star of good companies. But engagement actually only measures someone at work, right? It's how engaged are they with work? How do they feel about their work? And the problem with engagement is that it forces us to ignore every other dimension of a person's life. Mm-hmm. And we've seen engagement globally fall and be stagnant for years. And at the same time, we're seeing mental health rise. We're seeing, people struggle more and suffer more than they ever had before. Uncertainty, economic, volatility. We've even seen companies, the time that companies, their lifespan of companies is shrinking. And so you have to ask yourself, what are we getting when we only focus on engagement? Because we're asking people to really be engaged and focused at work, but we're not considering any other dimension of their life, whether they're healthy, happy, whether they're socially connected or not, right? Yeah. And so my argument, and I think the system that we really get wrong, and it's not just we get wrong as organizations and societies and government, academia, is we should really be focused on human thriving. And human thriving is about measuring how people feel about their lives today and how they feel about their lives tomorrow. So Gallup has a thriving scale, and it's actually the scale that they use in the Global Workplace Report. And at the it's a ladder with 10 rungs, and on the bottom it is suffering and struggling. And people who are suffering or struggling have a very difficult and pessimistic view of their life today, and very, pessimistic view of their lives in the future. And people who are thriving at the top have an optimistic view of their life today and optimism about the future. And that's a holistic perspective. And so my belief is that because we spend more time at work than any other activity besides sleeping, that work should have a net positive effect on our lives, meaning it should help us move up that rung. Does that mean that work and workplaces are solely responsible for human thriving? No, absolutely not. There's individual responsibility. Like I said, there's government has a role and academia has a role. It's a societal challenge. But if the place we spend the most time of our lives isn't positively contributing to our human thriving, I think that's a problem that we should be tackling. And I'm on a mission. Part of my mission of reimagining success and thinking differently about the future of work is to move organizations to this belief that we should all be contributing to human thriving, and work should have a net positive effect on our lives.
It makes me think of, with the global workforce, and leaders hiring, people from different countries, not always having a great understanding or even an interest sometimes in knowing what's happening in different countries, and seeing how employees can be impacted by situations that are happening in their countries, right? We've seen that performance can decline because they're concerned about loved ones. They're concerned about things that are happening across the ocean, right? How, I mean, I know that you've done a lot of work on DEI initiatives, right, throughout your career. I'm actually wondering how would you coach your leaders in terms of really taking the time to understand the realities of the workforce that they're leading? Because I think that there's sometimes this gap of just, why aren't they performing and why are they preoccupied? And well, okay, but maybe the country that they're coming from, there's a genocide, there's strife, there's a war, there's poverty there, so how have you supported your leaders in terms of kind of looking at who are they leading, where are they coming from? Do you encourage them to kind of get to know their people at a deeper level?
Yeah, there's so many layers to this. So I think first of all is assume that 50% of the people that you're working with are dealing with some life-altering event. Mm-hmm. It could be a parent who just got diagnosed, a child who has a terminal illness, or it could be a loved one in another country that is suffering, or it could be a miscarriage that they've silently not said anything about, or it could be infertility, or, there's just, I think we just have to understand that the average person is probably 50% of people are at least at 50% are dealing with some significant life-altering activity in their lives. And depending on what country they're operating in, their social support system might be great or it might be non-existent, right? And so then the only support system they have may be what they get from work. And so what's the role of the workplace in supporting human thriving, right? And not just talking about compensation and benefits, but I'm talking about the relationship with your manager. Actually, one of the things that I find to be fascinating is in Gallup's 2024 Global Workplace Report, they measured human thriving on kind of the global average versus the top performing companies. And the single biggest differentiator between the average and top performing companies was the worker's relationship with their manager. And it was to a differential of 70%.
Wow.
So it's the relationship with your manager that really made the biggest difference between employees, whether the employee was struggling and suffering or whether or not they were engaged and thriving. And that just goes to reinforce human connection and the need for human connection and social strengthening, whether it's inside of work or outside of work. Because as I said, whether you're a senior leader or your middle manager, people are anxious, they're lonely, they're struggling. And so I find that, something as simple as making sure we have leaders who can understand when someone's struggling and what to do to support them. So it could be as simple as making sure leaders are certified for mental health first aid, right? Just knowing the signs. And again, you're not expected as a leader to be a therapist. You're not expected to have to solve these problems, but do you know the signs of when someone may need help? Having robust, systems of support that people can leverage if they do need support. And that could be anything from your leave system to your, medical benefits, to your mental health benefits, to your, physical benefits. It's also how do you strengthen social cohesion in your organization? And how do you give people time outside of work to strengthen their social network outside of work? Because if your social network is weak outside of work, that's also a problem for human thriving, right? People are struggling with loneliness, generally speaking. And we know that one of the greatest predictors of long-term health and happiness is healthy, meaningful relationships. So I think, again, this just go back to, as a CHRO, if I was sitting in an organization right now, I would be taking that human thriving scale from Gallup and looking at all those indicators, social indicators, and saying, okay, as an organization, what role are we playing? And how do we have a net positive effect? And then how do I use my size and scale to impact policy, education, so that collectively people can thrive?
I love that.
Complicated answer, but like that is the what I genuinely deeply believe we need to move towards as leaders, as boards, as C-suite executives. Like we really do, because, and I would also say manager engagement has fallen dramatically for the first time, but it's recently. And when managers are disengaged, we risk everything when it comes to engagement and productivity in the workplace.
Yeah. No, I was speaking with an individual this week who was telling me that they were leading 35 direct reports and expected, like, this is a white collar role, and expected to do one-on-ones weekly. I mean, it was unachievable, right? To have the time to have those one-on-ones while at the same time clearing bottlenecks and so on and so, I think middle management plays a big role in making sure that your employees are doing well, that they're performing, that they're having those conversations with their leaders. But I think in some organizations they're putting too many employees under one leader, and then
100%. And I mean, middle managers, they're struggling and suffering as well. Like I said, middle manager engagement has fallen dramatically, and younger middle managers under 35 has fallen even further, and female managers has fallen even further than that. So like if we don't tackle that, if we don't take care of our middle managers, it used to be that, we'd say that happy employees create happy customers and a thriving business. And my formula now is a thriving manager enables thriving employees to take care of your customers and create a thriving business. If we don't secure that our leaders and managers are thriving, like I said, the whole workplace productivity, workplace engagement is at risk. And that's exactly what Gallup has said as well.
Great. Okay. I see 12 comments and perhaps some questions here. So just bear with me while I move through this. Somebody had said, love the content from Nabeela. Thank you for your efforts. Okay, let's see if you have any questions. Oh, here, we've got a question. What skills, okay, well, it was what skills helped you rise into the C-suite most? That was at 12:09. So I think that you answered that earlier. Let's just see. Hi, Nabeela. This is from Dyson, IKEA, Houston. Loved working with you.
Hi, Dyson. I remember Dyson, yes.
Miss you. That's awesome. Okay, so we have a question from Akib. How many hours do you work a day, and how do you manage your life? What is the biggest challenge in your life, business-wise and personal-wise, if you want to share? So I don't know if that's now as a consultant or when you were sitting in the C-suite, but
yeah, so I can answer both. So I would say the average work week when you're in a C-suite role is upwards of 60 hours a week. I mean, some weeks, depending on if you're traveling, or you have a board meeting or something, could be more than that. I mean, I think that's pretty customary. Now, I will say that there is a law of diminishing return in the sense that once you've worked more than 55 hours a week in a work week, you're going to be less productive, less effective, more irritable. So those 5 hours, those hours you're working after 55, don't expect them to be really productive hours, right? You may have to do them on occasion. There's weeks where you might, but they're not really productive hours. And I will say that, there's this great example, the first CEO and founder of Netflix. I love the way he describes this. And so he talks about hard work in the context of a triathlon. So at the beginning of a triathlon is the swimming leg. And in a non-paced triathlon, all the swimmers jump into the ocean at the same time. So imagine people are flailing their arms, they're pulling people down, you're getting elbowed. And the only way to survive the first leg of a triathlon is to sprint like your life depends on it. And you sprint until you've gotten space between yourself and everyone else. And then once you get into open water, you can find a sustainable pace till you finish that leg. And so there's always going to be times in your career when you're sprinting. Mm-hmm. And it's to recognize that you're in that sprint, but then you have to get to a sustainable pace, right? So you have to find a sustainable pace, and that maybe is upskilling your team, or it's, looking at your portfolio, or it's thinking about the work in a different context, or it's automating stuff, or it's, like you have to find a way to get to sustainable pace, because you can't sprint forever without there being long-term consequences of both you and your organization. And so I think it's to recognize like when in your life or in your career you're in that sprint, and how are you intentionally trying to get to a more sustainable pace. And so when I'm coaching people, I often like how to use that language. Like, are you in a sprint? Are you in a sustainable pace where you have some capacity to do other things? And then you can make some intentional choices. As a consultant, it really varies. I think there's weeks where I'm working probably the 60 hours. There's weeks when I'm working on really very healthy 35. And so the pace of that work is very different. But you have a lot more control over the volume of work that you take on, and if you want to take on clients and how much. And so you have that freedom and flexibility that's very different than you can control your own workload, which is different than you do in a corporate environment. And then I will also say I have 4 kids, so life is very hectic. And I have, the way you manage that is you outsource as much of it as you possibly can. And you have a system of support, partner, aunties, sisters, you've got this entire system of support through outsourcing and extended family that make it all work.
Good. Thank you. And thanks for that transparency as well. I think if anybody thinks that you're going to get there at 40 hours, no.
Yeah. And I mean, there's probably moments in my career where, I worked way too much for way too long. And there were consequences to that, on my mental health, on my physical health, on my sleep health. So these are things where I also really encourage people to have a baseline. Like you need to, and if you can compromise that baseline for a short amount of time, but at some point you have to get back to that baseline. And that baseline are the things that you need to maintain to protect your health and well-being. And so you can continue to be a positive contributor to the organization and to your family and to your life.
Yeah. I always kind of saw it as a seesaw, right? Like if I was winning at work, then I kind of feel like it might be that we're not winning at dinner. You're not going to
I don't think there's balance. I don't like that reference at all. I kind of feel like a juggle is more appropriate. Like, so you're juggling, right? And in different parts of your life, the complexity of what you're juggling changes, right? So early career, you may just have a lot of work balls in the air, right? And you're in university, you've got work, and then you get married, and then you have a partner to juggle, and then you get kids, and they have more to juggle. The question is understanding which balls are glass balls and which balls are plastic balls. And this is a quote. I can't remember who said it. It's not my quote, but and making sure you don't drop the glass balls, right? So, and keep in mind, you can have other people help you. Make sure that you're not dropping the glass balls. It's very hard to do by yourself.
So we have a question from somebody else. I don't have a name here, but how did you transition between ops and HR, and how did you manage that change? You alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I guess maybe they want some more details.
Yeah, so I was a district manager at the time, and I was very particular about developing people. I wanted to have amazing succession. I was very keen on making sure my team had development plans, and we're working through those development plans. And so I was a talent machine. I was just promoting talent. And so my VP of HR for the region recognized that I had this really deep succession pipeline and talent was coming out of my district. And so she came to me and she's like, can you do what you're doing for the district, for the region? Would you take talent acquisition? And I was like, sure. Because it was just a matter of scaling. It was like, because inevitably the district and the store was the talent pipeline for the organization. So if I could take what I was doing and scale it to the region, then that was the talent strategy for the region, right? And then this goes back to what I said at the beginning, which is, how do you solve organizational problems within your scope of control and your scope of influence? And then how do you teach others? And if we could teach others, then you found a scalable model that becomes organizational and makes a big impact. And so that is how I went from ops to HR. And then I was in talent acquisition and learning development. And I was like, you know what, I need to get skilled. So I went out and I got my SHRM certification, and I got skilled in HR. And so I learned the generalist side of it. And then I went to HR generalist. So I had talent acquisition and learning development. And then I went to an HR generalist role. And then I was like, I want to go sell stuff. Selling is fun. Into my operations, like I want to own a P&L. So I went back into ops. And I just did that back and forth, and so it was a combination of solving problems, learning skills, and then, and I just continued that back and forth. And I'll just say, like, when I hear someone's in marketing and it's like wants to go to customer experience or customer experience in marketing, there's always going to be aspects of different functions that cross over. Find a problem that you could solve, prove that you could solve it, scale it, and you become a really viable candidate, internally, to be able to switch over.
Excellent. Okay. Hi, Nabeela. How would you suggest managers to be more actively engaged in their own development process so they are able to support their team members as well?
Yeah, you should have a development plan. And I would even go as far to say a life plan, not just how you want to develop your skills in your current workplace or current role, but take that even broader, like think more broadly about, kind of your ambitions in life and what skills you want to grow and develop in. But have a plan, write it down. Like I teach and coach senior executives, and I last year facilitated a cohort of senior leaders from the communication and technology sector. And I'm constant, like, I can't tell you how few have a development plan. So you're a VP or a senior director, an executive, and you don't have a plan for yourself. You are literally you're kind of just floating in the wind, and you're waiting for someone to tap you on the shoulder to tell you, what to do next. And think of yourself as your most important project. You wouldn't approach a business project without a plan. Don't approach yourself without a plan. Mm-hmm. And so I think be intentional about it. Think about it as a scenario plan, because inevitably life never works out the way you expect. No. And then communicate that plan. Tell your boss about it. Tell your HR leader about it. Tell their boss about it. Let people know what your plans are and your interests are. Because also so few people can articulate that. You get asked what you want to do, what your ambition is, and people are like, I don't know. So I would say don't leave these things up for chance. So everyone wants to be successful. You define what success is, create a plan for yourself, communicate that plan.
It's interesting because when we're doing reach outs to leaders, I'll often say, well, have you spoken to your leader about what you would be looking for? Like, I'm calling you with this opportunity, but do you know if the opportunity exists within your organization? And no, my leader would have to leave, or how do you know that there's not another project around the corner for you? Or so I've often sent people back to have that conversation without saying they've spoken with the recruiter, but just to open the door to figure out. But I do find it ironic how, to your point, many people I think are just kind of blowing in the wind of, oh, well, I left because a recruiter called me. But what if you left at the wrong time, where you could have actually continued to grow in the organization that you're at? So I think having that, introspection and thinking, where do I want to go next? What is it that I want to do? And bringing that to your leadership to discuss, I think is an excellent first step, to your point, so that you don't just say recruiter and be like, okay, like,
it's a matter of like, work on yourself. It's like I said, consider yourself your greatest life project. And so what do you do in the thought process and intention, what intentionality do you have in terms of how you work on yourself?
Excellent. Last question that we have here. What is the best advice you will give to a senior leader who is jumping to a C-suite position? LinkedIn user asked this.
Yes. So I would say spend a really good amount of time getting to know your people, getting past I would say the kind of initial performative like conversations, get into the kitchen of the business. Like especially if you're in a new organization, really understand the product and the customer as deeply as you can. So, as much time as you can spend on the shop floor, in the distribution center, in the field with your customers, on the trucks, riding with your drivers, like getting into that, because you will always have a different version of truth. And so your version of truth is going to go through many, 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 many filters. And in many cases, you might not always get the real version of truth unless you get into the details. And I'd say you do that forever, but I spent a good amount of time in that. So you have a really wide range of what the state of the business is. in, or the state the business is at. And then I would say really make sure that you have a good board of advisors. And I'm not talking about like your board, your direct board, but people that you can call on and bounce ideas off on and have honest conversations with. Because like I said at the beginning, senior leadership can be lonely and you might be uncertain about things and you want someone who you can be a trusted advisor to you. So that's an executive coach or a mentor or somebody you've worked with in the past in a different organization. I think that's really important. So those two things would be my greatest advice.
Fantastic. We've got 30 seconds left. Favorite book or I don't know. Yeah. Favorite book or
well, I'll tell you, I don't know if it's my favorite, but I'll tell you one that I just finished reading and I highly recommend. And it's very consistent with my story or with the stories that I'm sharing is It's Never Not Working by Melissa Clark. You can see the tabs I've got here. And it's about our unhealthy relationship with work, success, and achievement. Like I said, it's a really good book. She's a professor and she's taken it from an organizational development perspective. And I think there's a lot of good lessons and advice that she gives in this book. So highly recommend it.
Amazing. And podcast, which is the word I was looking for.
Yeah, I just launched the Reimagine Success podcast. So my last episode came out with one of my dear mentors and friends, Chester Elton, who's also an author of Anxiety at Work and The Gratitude Habit and, Global Guru. So if you want to listen and learn from someone who just truly lives a life of abundance and grace, he's just a remarkable human being. So highly encourage people to listen to that.
Fantastic. Nabeela, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. You're amazing. And we've learned so much from you today. I can't thank you enough. It's been enlightening. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much, Samantha, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks everybody for listening in. Have a great day. Oh.